The kitchen was silent except for the sound of paper trembling in Eleanor Whitmore's hands. "Mother, what is that?" Eleanor looked up to find her daughter standing in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame for balance, her dark eyes already reading the fear on her mother's face. "It is nothing that concerns you, sweetheart." But Josephine had already crossed the room. At 16, she moved with careful deliberation, compensating for what she could no longer fully trust her senses to provide. She took the letter gently from her mother's hands and read it in silence, her lips moving slightly as she processed each word. When she finished, she set the paper down on the kitchen table with unusual precision. "He is threatening you. For asking him to help with my surgery." Eleanor had no answer that would make this better. "He would rather hire attorneys than meet me. His own daughter. He would rather destroy your reputation than acknowledge I exist." The words hung in the morning light filtering through the window. Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand, but Josephine had already turned away, walking back toward her room with the careful steps of someone navigating a world that was growing quieter by the week. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Eleanor sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time after Josephine left. The letter lay before her, its heavy cream paper and embossed letterhead radiating the kind of wealth that could afford to be cruel. The law firm of Ashworth, Pemberton, and Associates represented only one client in Millbrook County. Everyone knew that. Walter Crane had built his empire with precision and control, and he protected it with the same ruthless efficiency. She had prepared herself for resistance. Perhaps indignation. Perhaps even silence. What she had not anticipated was a certified legal document threatening to pursue action for defamation, harassment, and fraudulent misrepresentation if she or anyone acting on her behalf attempted further contact with Walter Crane or any member of his immediate family. Through the window, she could see the bare branches of the maple tree Josephine had climbed as a child. Before climbing became difficult. Before so many things became difficult. The house was modest. 2 bedrooms with original hardwood floors that creaked in winter and a kitchen that still had the avocado green appliances from the 1970s. It sat on a quiet street 12 miles from the Crane family estate and the clockworks factory that had defined this region for 4 generations. 12 miles from the man who had once promised her a future and then erased her from his life like a pencil mark that had served its purpose. All she had done was write him a letter. 7 sentences. An acknowledgement of their daughter's existence. A DNA test. A medical diagnosis. A request for assistance. An offer to discuss arrangements at his convenience. She had not begged. She had not explained. She had simply stated facts and asked for help. His response was to declare war. From down the hall, she could hear the faint sound of piano keys. Josephine practicing, though practicing meant something different now than it had a year ago. Now it was muscle memory and the feeling of keys beneath her fingers rather than the sound they produced. The hearing aids helped, but they could not restore what was being lost piece by piece, frequency by frequency, like colors slowly draining from a photograph. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened to her daughter play a piece she could barely hear. The specialist in Hartford had been gentle but direct. Progressive sensory neural hearing loss. Genetic in origin. Accelerating faster than they had initially projected. Without intervention within the next 8 months, the damage would become permanent. There was an experimental procedure. Available at only 3 centers in the country. 70% success rate for patients in Josephine's stage of deterioration. $370,000. Insurance covered none of it. Eleanor had done the math so many times that the numbers had lost meaning. She had taken on additional bookkeeping clients. Sold the car her father had left her. Cancelled the modest family vacation they had planned. And still the gap between what she had and what she needed stretched like an ocean she could never swim across. That was why she had finally broken 16 years of silence. Not for herself. Never for herself. But because her daughter's future depended on resources Eleanor could never provide alone. Resources that her daughter's father possessed in quantities beyond imagining. And he had responded by threatening to destroy her. The piano music stopped. In the silence that followed, Eleanor heard something she had not heard in months. The sound of Josephine crying. Quiet, muffled, the kind of crying a teenager does when she believes no one can hear. Eleanor pressed her palm flat against the kitchen table, steadying herself against the weight of everything she could not fix. 12 miles away, Walter Crane stood at the window of his corner office, watching the factory floor below where his great-grandfather had once stood. The Crane Precision Works had manufactured timepieces and precision mechanisms for 120 years. Train station clocks across 4 continents. Aerospace components. Medical devices. Under Walter's leadership, the company had expanded into territories his ancestors could never have imagined. His net worth, according to the business publications that profiled him regularly, exceeded $900 million. He had a wife from an appropriate family. 2 sons attending appropriate universities. A reputation for measured judgment that made his word effectively law in this corner of Connecticut. He served on the boards of hospitals, museums, and conservation societies. By every metric that mattered in the circles where he moved, Walter Crane was a success beyond reproach. The letter from Eleanor Whitmore had disrupted everything. He remembered her, of course. 18 years ago, she had been the junior accountant assigned to audit the factory's pension fund. 26 years old. Quietly intelligent. An attention to detail that had impressed him. Their affair had lasted 11 months. Long enough for him to make promises he never intended to keep. Long enough to speak of futures he knew were impossible given who he was and who she was not. He had ended things when his father arranged his marriage to Caroline Aldrich. Eleanor had resigned the following month. He had assumed, with the convenient certainty of a man who preferred not to examine his assumptions, that she had moved on. Relocated, perhaps. Married someone else. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago. It claimed that she had given birth to a daughter 7 months after leaving Crane Precision. That the child was now 16. That she suffered from a progressive auditory condition. That Eleanor was requesting assistance with an experimental surgical treatment that offered her best hope of preserving what remained of her hearing. Walter's response had been immediate and instinctive. He had called his personal attorney. Directed him to investigate. Authorized whatever measures were necessary to protect the family name. The threatening letter had been sent within 48 hours. Now he stood at his window, reviewing the investigator's preliminary report, and felt the first unwelcome stirring of doubt. The DNA test Eleanor had included appeared legitimate. His investigators had confirmed she was telling the truth about the child's birth date. The medical records, obtained through channels Walter preferred not to examine closely, documented exactly what Eleanor had claimed. Progressive sensory neural hearing loss. The same condition that had claimed his grandmother's hearing by age 50. A genetic condition. Walter set the report on his desk and poured himself bourbon from the crystal decanter that had belonged to his father. He drank it in a single swallow, welcoming the burn. The IPO announcement was scheduled for March. Crane Precision was going public after 120 years as a family-held company. The offering was projected to value the firm at $2 billion. The last thing he needed was a paternity scandal. An illegitimate daughter. A suggestion that the composed patriarch of Millbrook's most prominent family had abandoned a child who now faced disability. He would not be manipulated. Not by sentiment. Not by old mistakes. And certainly not by a woman he had dismissed 16 years ago. His phone rang. Benjamin Ashworth, senior partner at the firm that handled all Crane family legal matters. Walter, we have received a response from Miss Whitmore. She is not backing down. In fact, she has retained counsel. Walter's jaw tightened. Who would take that case against us? Florence Hartwell. The name gave Walter pause. Florence Hartwell had retired from the bench 5 years ago after a career that had made her something of a legend in family court. She had a reputation for taking on cases against wealthy defendants, and a winning record that made corporate attorneys nervous. She is 72 years old, Walter said. And she has never lost a paternity case, Ashworth replied. Walter, I must advise you again. The countersuit strategy carries significant risk. If the DNA confirms paternity, and the medical condition is genuine, the optics of attacking a mother seeking help for a sick child will be devastating. Particularly with the IPO timing. I am not paying a cent until I understand exactly what is happening here, Walter said. She waited 16 years. 16 years of silence, and suddenly she needs money the moment our public offering is announced. This is extortion dressed up as maternal concern. Perhaps, Ashworth said carefully. But the science does not care about timing. And if that child is yours, the court will not care either. Walter ended the call without responding. Alone in his office, surrounded by antique clocks his great-grandfather had built, he pulled out the DNA report and studied it again. The numbers were unambiguous. 99.9998% probability of paternity. He set the report aside and looked out at the factory floor below. His legacy. His life's work. Everything he had sacrificed to build. A daughter he had never met was not going to disrupt that. Not now. Not ever. The first hearing was scheduled for a bitter morning in January. Eleanor arrived at the Millbrook County Courthouse with Florence Hartwell beside her and a thick folder of documents clutched against her chest. She had not slept well in weeks. The legal fees she could not afford. The medical bills mounting on her kitchen table. Josephine's hearing deteriorating with every passing day. But she had not given up. Florence had counseled her to remain calm. To speak only when addressed. To let the facts carry the weight of their argument. The DNA results were irrefutable. The medical documentation was comprehensive. The surgery window was closing. Everything was on their side except the one thing that mattered most in American courtrooms. Money. Walter Crane arrived with 3 attorneys and the quiet confidence of a man who had never lost a battle he cared to win. His suit probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly mortgage payment. His expression revealed nothing as he took his seat at the plaintiff's table. He did not look at her. Not once. Judge Irene Doyle presided from the bench with the weary practicality of a woman who had seen every form of family destruction and was no longer impressed by wealth or status. She reviewed the documents before her with visible impatience. "Let me be certain I understand the situation," she said finally, removing her reading glasses. "Miss Whitmore, you have submitted DNA evidence confirming that Mr. Crane is the biological father of your daughter Josephine. You are requesting assistance with medical expenses for an experimental treatment for a progressive hearing condition. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Eleanor said. "And Mr. Crane, you have filed a countersuit alleging fraud, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You are seeking to have Miss Whitmore's claims dismissed and to recover damages for what your legal team describes as a transparent attempt to extort money from a successful businessman on the eve of his company's public offering." Walter's lead attorney rose smoothly. "That is correct, Your Honor. My client has legitimate concerns about the timing and motivation behind these sudden claims. Miss Whitmore waited 16 years to come forward. The coincidence with Crane Precision's IPO announcement cannot be ignored." Judge Doyle studied the attorney with an expression that suggested she was not impressed. "I am not interested in coincidences, Counselor. I am interested in a 16-year-old girl who appears to be losing her hearing while adults argue about stock offerings." She turned her attention back to the documents. "The DNA results appear conclusive. The medical records document a genuine and progressive condition. Miss Whitmore is requesting assistance with medical expenses that Mr. Crane's resources could easily accommodate." She looked directly at Walter. "What exactly are we arguing about?" For the first time, something flickered across Walter's composed expression. Something that might have been discomfort. But his attorney stepped in smoothly. "Your Honor, my client disputes the veracity of these claims. We are requesting independent verification of the DNA results through court-supervised testing. We are also requesting a comprehensive review of Miss Whitmore's financial records to establish whether she has truly exhausted other options for funding this treatment." Judge Doyle nodded slowly. "I am ordering immediate DNA verification through a laboratory selected by this court. I am also appointing an independent medical expert to review the child's condition and treatment options. We will reconvene in 3 weeks." She fixed Walter with a stern gaze. "And Mr. Crane, I am staying your countersuit pending these results. This court will not be used as a weapon in what should be a straightforward paternity and support matter. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Walter said. His voice was controlled, but Eleanor caught the slight tightening of his jaw. He was not accustomed to being reprimanded. As they filed out of the courtroom, reporters who had somehow learned of the case swarmed around them. The story had leaked. Billionaire CEO's mother seeking child support. It made for irresistible headlines. Eleanor followed Florence through a side exit, shielding her face from cameras. Her hands were shaking. "Is this going to hurt Josephine?" she asked once they were safely in Florence's car. "We will protect her as much as possible," Florence replied. But Crane made this public when he filed that aggressive countersuit. "He is not just fighting you anymore. He is fighting public opinion." She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. And that is a battle even billionaires sometimes lose. The weeks that followed were among the hardest of Eleanor's life. The DNA results, to no one's surprise except perhaps Walter's, confirmed paternity with absolute certainty. The independent medical evaluation not only verified Josephine's diagnosis but emphasized the urgency of beginning treatment. The window was closing faster than originally projected. Yet Walter's legal team continued to fight. Now they argued that while paternity was established, Eleanor's failure to inform him of Josephine's existence constituted parental alienation that should limit any financial obligations. They demanded comprehensive financial disclosures. They questioned her lifestyle choices. They suggested that her decision to remain in Millbrook rather than relocating somewhere the Crane family had no presence demonstrated ulterior motives. Each delay was calculated. Each request for additional documentation designed to run out the clock while Josephine's hearing faded further. "He is still trying to punish me," Eleanor told Florence during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Even at Josephine's expense." "Men like Crane hate losing control," Florence replied. "But he has overplayed his hand. Judge Doyle sees exactly what he is doing." What neither of them knew was that Walter had begun his own investigation into Josephine's condition, separate from his legal team's efforts. Without their knowledge or approval. He consulted with top pulmonary specialists about the genetic nature of hearing loss in his family line. He researched the experimental treatment Eleanor was seeking. He contacted the research facility developing it and visited in person under the pretext of considering a charitable donation. He spoke with the lead specialist about hypothetical cases matching his daughter's profile. Asked detailed questions about success rates and recovery timelines. Requested literature that he read alone in his study late at night while his wife slept and his sons texted from their universities. Something had shifted in him since seeing the DNA results. A reluctant acknowledgement that this child was in fact his biological offspring. It did not make him feel like her father, but it created an uncomfortable sense of responsibility he could not entirely dismiss. The media coverage was not helping. Public opinion had turned decisively against him. Social media campaigns called for boycotts of products manufactured by Crane Precision. Investors expressed concern about the potential impact on the upcoming IPO. His public relations director urged him daily to settle. "You need to make this go away," she said. "The optics are terrible. You are the billionaire refusing to help save his own daughter's life." "She is not my daughter in any meaningful sense," Walter snapped. "And I do not respond to public pressure." But alone in his office that evening, staring at the medical reports his private investigator had obtained, Walter found himself troubled by more than bad press. The reports painted a grim picture. Without intervention within the next 6 months, Josephine's hearing loss would become permanent and complete. The experimental treatment offered genuine hope. But the window for its effectiveness was closing rapidly. For the first time, Walter allowed himself to truly consider what was at stake. Not his money. Not his reputation. But a child's future. A child who, regardless of the circumstances of her conception, carried his DNA. A child who shared genetic material with his grandmother, who had spent her final decades in silence. He pushed the thought aside ruthlessly. He would not be manipulated. Across town, Josephine sat at the piano in the living room of her mother's modest house. The instrument was old, inherited from Eleanor's grandmother, but it had been well maintained. Its tone was warm and forgiving, which mattered less now than it once had. She could barely hear it anymore. Her fingers moved across the keys from memory. Debussy's Clair de Lune. She had been learning this piece since she was 12, before the diagnosis, back when music was sound rather than vibration. Now she played by feel. The pressure of keys beneath her fingers. The subtle resistance and release. The rhythm she counted in her head because she could no longer trust her ears to keep time. Her hearing aids helped with conversation if people faced her directly and spoke clearly. But music was different. Music required the full spectrum of frequency and nuance. The hearing aids compressed and distorted, turning Debussy into something muddy and mechanical. She had not told her mother how bad it had gotten. Eleanor had enough to worry about without knowing that her daughter sometimes could not hear her own name being called from the next room. The piano keys blurred as tears filled her eyes. She had looked up Walter Crane online. Read about his company, his family, his charitable work. Seen photographs of his legitimate sons, tall and confident at college events, bearing the family name without shame or complication. She had wondered what it would have been like to grow up with a father who acknowledged her existence, who came to school plays and piano recitals, who taught her to ride a bicycle or helped with homework or simply sat across from her at the dinner table and asked about her day. She would never know. The man who had helped create her had responded to her existence with lawyers and threats. He had looked at a DNA test confirming she was his child and seen only a liability to be managed. Josephine finished the piece, her fingers finding the final chord from muscle memory. In the silence that followed, she heard something she had not heard in weeks. Her mother crying in the kitchen, trying to be quiet about it, failing. Josephine did not go to comfort her. There was nothing either of them could say that would make this better. She simply sat at the piano, hands resting on keys that no longer sang to her, and waited for whatever came next. February brought ice storms and legal delays. The second hearing was scheduled, postponed due to weather, rescheduled, postponed again when one of Walter's attorneys claimed a family emergency. Each delay cost Eleanor money she did not have and time Josephine could not spare. Florence filed motion after motion demanding expedited proceedings given the medical circumstances. Judge Doyle granted some and denied others, bound by procedural requirements that favored those with resources to wait out their opponents. Meanwhile, Josephine's hearing continued to fade. She missed conversations at school, fell behind in classes that relied heavily on lecture, withdrew from friends who grew frustrated repeating themselves, started eating lunch alone in the library, where silence was expected rather than awkward. Her mother watched this happening and felt powerless to stop it. The third hearing arrived on a morning so cold that Eleanor's breath crystallized in the air as she walked from the parking lot to the courthouse. Florence met her at the entrance, her expression troubled. "There is something you should know," Florence said. "Crane has been conducting his own investigation into Josephine's condition. My sources tell me he visited the research facility in Philadelphia last month. Spoke with the specialists there about the treatment protocol." Eleanor stopped walking. Why would he do that if he is trying to prove her condition is fake? Florence shook her head slowly. That is the question, is it not? Inside the courtroom, Walter sat at the plaintiff's table with his team of attorneys. But something was different today. His posture was less rigid. His expression less controlled. He looked, Eleanor thought, like a man who had not been sleeping well. Judge Doyle called the proceedings to order. "We are here to review the results of the court-ordered medical evaluation and to determine next steps regarding Mr. Crane's obligations to the minor child Josephine Whitmore." She looked between the two parties. "I have reviewed the evaluation thoroughly. The child's condition is genuine, progressive, and urgent. The recommended treatment offers significant hope for preserving her remaining hearing, but the window for intervention is closing rapidly. Based on the specialist's assessment, we are looking at approximately 5 months before the damage becomes irreversible." She removed her reading glasses and fixed Walter with a direct stare. "Mr. Crane, the DNA has confirmed your paternity. The medical emergency has been verified. Your financial resources are more than sufficient to address this child's needs. I am prepared to issue a temporary order requiring you to fund the recommended treatment immediately." "Your Honor," Walter's lead attorney rose quickly. "We request additional time to review the medical findings. There are questions about the experimental nature of the treatment that require independent assessment." Judge Doyle's expression hardened. "Counselor, we have been through independent assessment. The results are conclusive. Your client is the father of a child who is losing her hearing while you file motions." She turned back to Walter. "I'm giving you 1 more week, Mr. Crane. At our next hearing, I expect you to have made a decision about how you intend to fulfill your legal and moral obligations to this child. If you have not, I will make that decision for you." She banged her gavel. "We are adjourned." As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor caught Walter looking at her for the first time since the proceedings began. Something passed across his face. Something complicated. Something that might have been doubt. Then he turned away and followed his attorneys out of the courtroom, and the moment was gone. That evening, Walter did something he had not done in 16 years. He drove to the address his investigators had provided. Eleanor's modest house on a quiet street in the older part of Millbrook. He parked across the street, engine running against the February cold, and simply watched. Through the front window, he could see the warm glow of lights. Could make out movement inside. A figure crossing from the kitchen to the living room. Then he heard it. Faint through the closed windows and the distance. Piano music. Debussy. Clair de Lune. He recognized it immediately. His mother had played this piece. Had played it for him as a child, before the cancer took her when he was 14. He had sat beside her on the piano bench and watched her fingers move across the keys with the same careful precision that now characterized his approach to everything in life. His mother had been the last person who made him feel truly known. After her death, his father had retreated into the factory. Had become physically present but emotionally absent. Had measured success in profit margins and market share because those were quantifiable and feelings were not. Walter had grown up the same way. Had built his empire on control and precision. Had eliminated from his life anything that could not be managed, negotiated, or dismissed. Including, he now understood, his own daughter. The piano music stopped. Through the window, he saw a figure move to close the curtains. A slim silhouette. Dark hair. The particular posture of someone compensating for compromised hearing. For a long moment, Walter sat in his car, watching the house where his daughter lived. The daughter he had never held. Never comforted. Never known. Then he drove away. But he did not forget. 3 days later, Walter appeared in court without his legal team. Judge Doyle studied him with undisguised surprise. "Mr. Crane, where is your representation?" "I have dismissed them for today's session," Walter said. "There are matters I wish to address personally." He stood, and for the first time, looked directly at Eleanor. "I have had the medical documentation independently reviewed by specialists of my own choosing. The diagnosis is accurate. The recommended procedure offers genuine hope for preserving my daughter's hearing. The treatment window is limited and closing." He paused. His jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice carried something Eleanor had not heard in it before. "I am prepared to cover all medical expenses immediately. I am also prepared to establish ongoing support for Josephine's education and care." The courtroom fell utterly silent. "What about the countersuit?" Judge Doyle asked. "The defamation claims." "Withdrawn. They were filed in haste and without merit." Eleanor sat frozen in her seat. Beside her, Florence Hartwell was already reviewing the documents Walter's assistant had delivered. "Why the change of position, Mr. Crane?" Judge Doyle pressed. Walter was quiet for a long moment. The courtroom waited. "Because I spent 16 years believing I had made the correct decision. That eliminating complications was the same as eliminating consequences." He did not look at Eleanor. "I was wrong. The consequences remained. I simply was not present to witness them." Judge Doyle nodded slowly. "This is a significant shift, Mr. Crane. The court appreciates your willingness to fulfill your obligations." "There is more," Walter said. He produced a second set of documents. "I am establishing a trust for Josephine. $300 million. Half of my current net worth. It will be managed professionally until she reaches 25, with provisions for education, healthcare, and reasonable living expenses before then." This time, Eleanor could not contain her gasp. "Mr. Crane," Judge Doyle said, "that is extraordinarily generous. Far beyond anything this court would have ordered." "She is my daughter," Walter said simply. "She should benefit from my success. Whatever the circumstances of her birth. Whatever my failings in acknowledging her existence." He finally turned to face Eleanor. "I cannot undo 16 years of absence. I cannot give back the time I should have been present. But I can ensure that her future is secure. That she receives the treatment she needs. That she never has to worry about money the way you have worried." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Tears streamed down her face. "There is one more thing," Walter said. His voice had grown quieter. More uncertain. "I would like the opportunity to meet her. My daughter. Not as an adversary. Not through lawyers and courtrooms. but as the person I should have been from the beginning. He paused. If she is willing. If you are willing. Eleanor looked at this man who had once dismissed her without a backward glance. Who had responded to her plea for help by threatening to destroy her. Who had fought for months to avoid acknowledging that his own daughter existed. Something had changed in him. She could see it in the way he held himself. In the uncertainty beneath his controlled expression. In the fact that he had come here today without his armor of attorneys, willing to speak for himself. She did not know if she could trust it, but she knew that Josephine deserved the chance to make that decision herself. I will ask her, Eleanor said finally. But you need to understand something, Walter. She has built her entire life without you. Your presence now is not a gift she has been waiting for. It is a disruption. She may not welcome it. I understand, Walter said. And if you hurt her, Eleanor continued, her voice hardening. If you come into her life and then disappear again when it becomes inconvenient. If you treat her the way you treated me. I will not give you a second chance. And neither will she. Walter nodded slowly. I understand that too. Judge Doyle cleared her throat. This is remarkable progress. I am going to order a 30-day period for the parties to work out the details of support, the trust establishment, and any custody or visitation arrangements. I want updates at our next hearing on how this is proceeding. She looked between them. Whatever happened to bring about this change, I hope it continues. This child has waited long enough for her parents to put her interests first. She banged her gavel. We are adjourned. That evening, Eleanor sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table. Josephine listened as Eleanor explained what had happened in court. The withdrawn lawsuit. The medical expenses. The trust worth $300 million. The request to meet her. When Eleanor finished, Josephine was quiet for a long time. Why now? She finally asked. Why, after everything he did, does he suddenly want to be part of my life? Eleanor had been asking herself the same question. I do not know, she admitted. Something changed for him. I do not know what or why. But he seemed genuine today in a way I have not seen before. Josephine looked down at her hands. The hands that still played piano even though she could barely hear it anymore. What if he changes his mind again? What if I let him in and he decides I am too much trouble? Just like before. Eleanor reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. Then we deal with that if it happens. But Josephine, you deserve the chance to know your father. To make your own decision about who he is. Not based on what he did 16 years ago, but based on who he is now. Who he might become. Josephine was silent for another long moment. Then she looked up. Met her mother's eyes. I want to meet him. But not here. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere I can leave if I need to. Eleanor nodded. I will arrange it. Josephine stood from the table. Paused at the doorway. Mom. Thank you. For fighting for me. For never giving up. Eleanor smiled through the tears that had been threatening all day. Always, sweetheart. No matter what. The meeting was arranged for a Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe in a neighboring town. Neutral ground, as Josephine had requested. Eleanor would wait in the car outside, close enough to retrieve her daughter if needed, far enough to give them privacy. Josephine arrived first. She chose a table by the window where she could watch the door and the parking lot simultaneously. Her hearing aids were freshly charged. She had practiced her lip reading. She was as prepared as she could be. When Walter Crane walked through the door, she recognized him immediately from the photograph she had found online. Tall. Distinguished. Silver threading through dark hair. The kind of presence that made people step aside without being asked. He scanned the cafe, found her, and something crossed his face that she could not quite read. Then he walked toward her table. Josephine, he said. She nodded. Gestured to the seat across from her. He's Saturday. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I do not know how to do this, Walter finally said. I have no experience being a father. No framework for this conversation. Neither do I, Josephine replied. I have no experience having one. The words landed between them. Walter absorbed the weight of them. That is fair, he said. Josephine studied him. This stranger who shared her genetics, who had helped create her and then pretended she did not exist. Why did you change your mind? She asked. Walter considered the question carefully. Many reasons. The DNA test making denial impossible. The medical reports making the stakes clear. The public pressure affecting my business. He paused. But mainly, I sat in my car outside your house a few nights ago and listened to you play piano through the window. Josephine blinked. That was not the answer she had expected. My mother played Claire de Lune, Walter continued. She died when I was 14. Cancer. I used to sit beside her on the piano bench while she played. It was one of the few times my family felt like a family. He looked at her directly. Hearing you play the same piece. Knowing you might lose the ability to hear it. Knowing I could help and was choosing not to. Something broke in me that night. Josephine was quiet for a long moment. I cannot hear it anymore, she finally said. When I play, I can feel the keys and remember how it sounded. But the actual music is gone for me now. Walter's expression shifted. Something raw moved beneath the surface. The surgery, he said. If it works. There is a chance, Josephine confirmed. A good chance. But no guarantees. Walter nodded slowly. Then we take the chance. And if it does not work, we find another way. I have resources. I will use every one of them. Josephine studied him. Looking for the lie. The manipulation. The angle. She found only a man who seemed as lost as she felt. You do not owe me anything, she said. The court would have ordered you to pay regardless. You did not have to set up a trust worth $300 million. You did not have to come here today. No, Walter agreed. I did not have to. So why did you? Walter was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Because I am 53 years old. I have spent my entire adult life building a company that will outlive me by generations. I have measured my worth in market share and quarterly earnings and the respect of people who would abandon me the moment I stopped being useful. He looked at his hands on the table. And when I read those DNA results, when I understood that you were mine, I realized I have no idea what any of it means. The money, the success, the legacy. None of it matters if I die alone in a penthouse surrounded by people who only pretend to care about me because I pay them. He looked up at her. I do not expect you to love me. I do not expect you to forgive 16 years of absence. But I would like the chance to know you. To be something more than the man who threatened your mother and tried to pretend you did not exist. Josephine felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something. What do I call you? She asked. Walter seemed taken aback by the question. I do not know, he admitted. What do you want to call me? Josephine considered. I think for now, I will call you Walter. Walter nodded slowly. Something that might have been sadness, might have been acceptance, crossed his face. That is fair, he said. I have not earned anything else. They talked for 2 hours. About her school. Her piano. Her friends, or the ones she used to have before her hearing made conversation too exhausting. About his work. His childhood. His mother who had played Debussy in a house full of clocks. When they finally stood to leave, Walter reached into his pocket and produced a small box. I brought you something, he said. For after the surgery. For when you can hear again. Josephine opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant. A treble clef. My mother had one just like it, Walter said. She left it to me when she died. I have kept it in a drawer for almost 40 years. He cleared his throat. I would like you to have this one. If you want it. Josephine looked at the necklace. Then at the man who had given it to her. She did not say thank you. Did not say she forgave him. Did not pretend that a piece of jewelry could undo 16 years of absence. But she took the box. And she nodded. And when she walked out of the cafe to where her mother waited in the car, she was wearing the necklace against her heart. The surgery was scheduled for April. The weeks leading up to it were filled with preparations. Pre-operative testing. Consultations with the surgical team. Long discussions about expectations and recovery timelines and the possibility, however small, that the procedure might not work. Walter funded everything. Every specialist. Every test. Every accommodation that might make Josephine more comfortable. He also continued to show up. Dinner once a week at a restaurant in the next town. Coffee after school on Wednesdays. Saturday afternoons at his home, where Josephine discovered a piano even more beautiful than the one she had grown up playing. He was awkward at first. Uncertain. Unused to conversations that were not negotiations or strategies. But he kept trying. And slowly, reluctantly, Josephine began to let him in. Not all the way. Not with the trust she gave her mother or her older sister Rachel, who had driven down from Boston to help with the surgery preparations. But enough to acknowledge that maybe, possibly, this stranger who shared her DNA was trying to become something more. The night before the surgery, Walter came to Eleanor's house for the first time. He stood in the doorway, looking at the modest living room, the worn furniture, the upright piano where his daughter had taught herself to play music she could no longer hear. "You built a good life for her," he said to Eleanor. "Despite everything I failed to provide." Eleanor considered the man she had once loved. The man who had broken her heart and then tried to break her spirit. "I built what I could," she said. "With what I had." Walter nodded. "I know I cannot make up for the past," he said. "But I want you to know. I am not going anywhere. Whatever happens tomorrow. Whatever comes after. I am not disappearing again." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she did something she had not expected to do. She invited him inside. They sat in the kitchen. Drank coffee. Talked about Josephine's chances. About the recovery process. About what came next. For the first time in 16 years, they spoke to each other not as adversaries. Not as former lovers. But as two people who shared something more important than their history. A daughter who needed them both. When Walter left that night, Eleanor stood in the doorway and watched him walk to his car. He paused. Turned back. "I never apologized," he said, "for how I treated you. Back then. And these past few months." Eleanor waited. "I am sorry," Walter said. "It does not fix anything. It does not undo the years you raised her alone. But I am sorry." Eleanor looked at this man who had once been everything to her. Who had broken her completely. Who was now trying, however imperfectly, to become the father their daughter deserved. "I know," she said. She did not say she forgave him. Some wounds do not close that easily. But she nodded. And she watched him drive away. And when she went back inside, she found Josephine standing at the bottom of the stairs. "I heard that," Josephine said. "Most of it anyway." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Old habits. I should have known you would be listening." Josephine came to stand beside her mother. "Do you think he means it? That he is not going anywhere?" Eleanor put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I think he wants to mean it. And I think sometimes that is how it starts. Wanting to be better. Trying to be better. Failing and trying again." She kissed the top of Josephine's head. "I guess we will find out." The morning of the surgery arrived with a kind of pale spring sunshine that felt like a promise. Eleanor and Josephine drove to Philadelphia in Rachel's car. Rachel had taken the week off from her job to be there. The three of them together, as they had been through every crisis and every triumph. Walter met them at the hospital. He looked like he had not slept. His suit was rumpled. His composure, usually so impeccable, showed cracks at the edges. "How are you feeling?" he asked Josephine. "Terrified," she admitted. "But ready." Walter nodded. "That sounds about right." The surgical team came to take Josephine to pre-op. Eleanor went with her, holding her hand until the last possible moment. Walter stood in the hallway with Rachel, watching them go. "She is strong," Rachel said. "She gets that from her mother." Walter glanced at this young woman who had every reason to hate him. Eleanor's daughter from a previous marriage. The one who had helped raise Josephine when he had refused to acknowledge she existed. "I know," he said. Rachel studied him with the same directness Josephine had inherited from Eleanor. "I want to believe you have changed," she said. "I want to believe that when this is over, You will not disappear back into your penthouse and your boardrooms and forget you have a daughter. She turned to face him fully. But I also know that wanting to believe something does not make it true. So I am going to wait. And watch. And if you hurt her, either of them, I will make sure you regret it. Walter met her gaze steadily. Fair enough, he said. Rachel nodded once. Then she walked away to find coffee, leaving Walter alone in the hallway with his thoughts. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Eleanor and Walter sat on opposite sides of the waiting room for most of it. Not talking. Not reading. Just waiting. Rachel came and went with coffee and updates she had charmed out of sympathetic nurses. The minutes crawled past like hours. Finally, the surgeon emerged. Still in her scrubs. Exhausted but smiling. It went well, she said. Better than we hoped. The nerve response during the procedure was stronger than expected. We will not know the full extent of the restoration until she heals, but I am optimistic. Eleanor burst into tears. Walter simply closed his eyes and breathed. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you. They were allowed to see Josephine 2 hours later, once she was settled in her recovery room. Eleanor went first. Held her daughter's hand and cried and thanked God and every surgeon and every force in the universe that had brought them to this moment. Then she stepped back and nodded to Walter. He approached the bed slowly. Josephine was groggy from the anesthesia, her head wrapped in bandages, tubes and monitors tracking her vital signs. Hey, she murmured when she saw him. Hey, he replied. Did it work? We think so. We will know more when you heal. Josephine nodded slowly. Her eyes were already closing. Glad you are here, she whispered. Then she was asleep. Walter stood by her bed for a long time, watching his daughter breathe. This child he had denied. This life he had nearly destroyed with his pride and his fear. In the hallway outside, Eleanor and Rachel watched through the window. I still do not trust him completely, Rachel said. Neither do I, Eleanor admitted. But he is here. He is trying. And right now, that is enough. Rachel nodded slowly. I guess we will see. Through the window, they watched Walter pull a chair close to Josephine's bed and settle in for the night. Watched him take his daughter's hand and hold it while she slept. They did not know what the future would bring. Whether the healing would be complete. Whether Walter would keep his promises. Whether the damage of 16 years could ever truly be repaired. But for now, in this moment, a father was holding his daughter's hand. And that was a start. The days that followed were a blur of medical updates and gradual improvement. Josephine's hearing returned slowly, like a radio being tuned from static to clarity. First whispers she had not heard in months. Then normal conversation. Then music, playing softly from the speaker by her hospital bed. When she heard her mother's voice clearly for the first time in over a year, she cried. When she heard a piano piece playing on the radio, she cried harder. Walter came every day. Sat with her during physical therapy. Helped her navigate the overwhelming experience of a world that suddenly had sound again. He also began, slowly, to talk about things he had never discussed with anyone. His mother's death. His father's emotional abandonment. The way he had built walls around himself to avoid ever feeling that kind of loss again. I pushed everyone away, he said one afternoon when Josephine was nearly ready to be discharged. Anyone who might matter. Anyone who might leave. I told myself it was strength. Control. But it was just fear. Josephine listened. She was getting better at that now that she could actually hear. What changed? She asked. You, Walter said simply. Finding out you existed. Realizing what I had lost. What I had thrown away. He looked at his hands. I do not know how to be a father, Josephine. I have no idea what I am doing. But I want to learn. If you will let me. Josephine was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Okay, she said. We can figure it out together. Walter's eyes glistened with tears he did not try to hide. Thank you, he whispered. The day Josephine was discharged from the hospital was the first truly warm day of spring. Eleanor drove while Josephine sat in the back seat with the window cracked open, listening to the sounds of the world rushing past. Birds singing. Car engines. The rumble of trucks on the highway. Sound she had thought she might never hear again. Rachel sat beside her, holding her hand. Walter followed in his own car, close behind. When they pulled up to Eleanor's modest house, Josephine saw something that made her catch her breath. A new piano sat on the front porch. A beautiful upright, polished and gleaming in the spring sunshine. Walter got out of his car and walked toward them. "I know it is not the same as your grandmother's," he said to Eleanor. "But I thought maybe. A fresh start. For all of us." Eleanor looked at the piano. Then at the man who had given it. "Where would we even put it?" she said. "This house is not exactly spacious." Walter hesitated. "I was hoping we could discuss that, actually. I have been thinking about some changes." "What kind of changes?" Walter glanced at Josephine, then back at Eleanor. "The kind that might require a bigger house. If you were open to it." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Walter, you cannot just buy us a house. I was thinking more along the lines of..." Walter paused. "Finding something together. Somewhere with room for a real music room. For Josephine to practice. For Rachel to visit. For..." He stopped himself. "For what?" Eleanor asked quietly. "For whatever comes next," Walter said. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I have not earned the chance to be part of your lives. But I want to try. To really try. Not just with Josephine. With all of it." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen in 16 years. "With you." Eleanor stared at him. This man who had broken her heart. Who had tried to destroy her in court. Who had somehow, improbably, found his way back to something resembling humanity. She did not know if she could trust it. Did not know if the wounds of the past could ever fully heal. But she also knew that people could change. That redemption was possible. That sometimes, the ending you feared most was not the ending you got. "I need time," she finally said. "To think about all of this." "Of course," Walter said. "Take all the time you need." He glanced at the piano on the porch. At Josephine leaning against Rachel's shoulder. At the modest house that had been Eleanor's fortress for 16 years. "I will be here," he said. "Whenever you are ready." Then he nodded once, got back in his car, and drove away. Eleanor stood in her driveway, watching until his car disappeared around the corner. "Mom," Josephine called from the porch. "Come play something with me." Eleanor turned and looked at her daughter. Her beautiful, resilient, hearing daughter. She walked up the porch steps and sat down beside her at the new piano. Together, they began to play. But this story is not over yet. Because even as Eleanor and Josephine played their first duet in over a year, events were already in motion that would change everything again. Events that would test whether Walter Crane's transformation was real. Whether the walls he had spent a lifetime building could truly come down. Whether the family he was trying to create could survive the truth that was about to emerge. A truth that Walter himself did not yet know. A truth that would force him to risk everything he had built, everything he owned, everything he thought he understood about who he was and what mattered. A truth about another daughter. One he had never even suspected existed. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Josephine came home from the hospital. Eleanor found it in her mailbox between a utility bill and a catalogue she had never requested. Plain white envelope. No return address. Her name written in careful handwriting she did not recognize. She almost threw it away unopened. Something made her pause. Some instinct developed over 16 years of navigating a world that did not always wish her well. She carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table. Through the window, she could see Josephine in the backyard, sitting in a lawn chair with her eyes closed, simply listening to the birds she could hear again. Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photograph, and a business card for a law firm in New Haven. The letter was brief. "Dear Miss Whitmore, my name is Margaret Holloway. I am 31 years old. I believe we have something in common. Or rather, someone. I have watched the news coverage of your case with great interest. I think it is time we talked. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Eleanor looked at the photograph. A young woman with dark hair and high cheekbones. a particular tilt to her head that Eleanor recognized immediately. The same tilt Josephine had when she was concentrating. The same tilt Walter Crane had when he was listening. Eleanor set the photograph down on the table and stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the business card. Margaret Holloway answered on the second ring. "Miss Whitmore. Thank you for calling. I was not certain you would." Her voice was controlled. Professional. The kind of voice that came from years of practice at concealing emotion. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked. "I think you already know. Or at least suspect." Eleanor closed her eyes. "You are saying Walter Crane is your father?" "Yes. Though he does not know I exist. At least, I do not believe he does." Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly around her. "How is that possible?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "It is a long story. One I would prefer to tell in person. Would you be willing to meet with me? Somewhere private. Somewhere we can talk without being overheard." Eleanor looked out the window at her daughter, still sitting in the sunshine, still marveling at the ordinary miracle of sound. "Why are you contacting me?" she asked. "Why not go directly to Walter?" "Because I have spent 31 years believing certain things about who he is," Margaret replied. "And now I am not sure those things are true. I thought you might be able to help me understand." Eleanor considered the request. Considered the risks. Considered what this might mean for Josephine, for Walter, for the fragile new reality they were all trying to build. She should say no. Should protect her daughter from whatever complications this woman might bring. But something in Margaret's voice reminded her of her own voice 16 years ago. Uncertain. Searching. Desperate for answers about a man who had shaped her life without her consent. "Tomorrow," Eleanor said. "There is a coffee shop in Madison. The one on the green. I will meet you there at 10. "Thank you," Margaret said. And then, more quietly, "I know this is strange. I know I am asking a lot. But I think when you hear what I have to say, you will understand why I had to reach out." The call ended. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the photograph still in her hand, and wondered what other secrets Walter Crane had buried over the years. And whether any of them were about to rise from the grave. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Eleanor arrived the next morning. She chose a table in the back corner, away from the windows, and waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, a woman walked through the door. Margaret Holloway was tall, composed, dressed in a simple blazer and slacks that suggested professional competence without ostentation. Her dark hair was pulled back from a face that bore unmistakable echoes of Walter Crane's features. She spotted Eleanor and crossed the room with measured steps. "Miss Whitmore. Thank you for coming. Please," Eleanor said. "Sit down." Margaret slid into the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You look like him," Eleanor finally said. "I know. It made things complicated, growing up. My mother could never quite look at me without seeing him." "Your mother?" Eleanor repeated. Margaret nodded slowly. Her name was Catherine. Catherine Holloway. She worked for Crane Precision in the early 1990s. In the administrative offices. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. "When?" she asked. 1991. She was 23. He was 26. Just starting to take over operations from his father. "That was before me," Eleanor said quietly. "Years before." "Yes. And therein lies the complication." Margaret reached into her bag and withdrew a folder thick with documents. "My mother kept everything," she said. "Letters. Photographs. Medical records. Even a DNA test she had done privately when I was 5 years old. She never showed anyone. Never told anyone except me. But she kept it all, in case someday I needed proof." "Proof of what?" "That Walter Crane is my father. And that his family paid my mother $200,000 to disappear and never contact him again." Eleanor stared at her. "His family paid her off. His father. Richard Crane. He came to see my mother when she was 6 months pregnant. Told her that his son had a future to protect. That a child born out of wedlock would be a scandal the family could not afford. He offered her money. A lot of it, for 1991. Enough to start over somewhere else." Margaret's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. She took the money. She was young. Scared. She had no family to support her, no resources to fight a man like Richard Crane. So she signed the papers, took the check, and moved to New Haven. And Walter never knew. My mother always said he did not. She said Richard Crane made her promise never to contact Walter directly. Threatened her with legal action if she tried. She believed, or wanted to believe, that Walter would have done the right thing if he had known. Margaret met Eleanor's eyes. But then I saw what he did to you. How he responded when you asked for help. And I wondered if my mother was wrong. If Walter Crane was exactly like his father after all. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. So why contact me now? She finally asked. What changed? Margaret leaned forward slightly. I saw the second hearing. The one where he dropped the lawsuit. Where he acknowledged Josephine and set up the trust. Where he said he wanted to be part of her life. She paused. And I thought, either that man is the greatest actor who ever lived, or something genuinely shifted in him. Either way, I need to know. Before I decide what to do next. What do you mean, what to do next? I am a lawyer, Miss Whitmore. I work for a firm that specializes in estate litigation. I know exactly what I would be entitled to if I came forward. What the courts would likely award. What the publicity would do to his precious IPO. Margaret's expression hardened for just a moment. For 31 years, I have lived with the knowledge that my father's family thought I was worth $200,000 and a signature on a non-disclosure agreement. That they calculated my value and found it manageable. Disposable. She straightened in her chair. But I also watched that video of Walter Crane holding Josephine's hand in the hospital. And I saw something in his face that I did not expect to see. What? Grief, Margaret said quietly. For the years he lost. The daughter he almost destroyed. The person he was becoming before he finally woke up. She looked at Eleanor directly. I need to know if it is real. And I think you are the only person who can tell me. Eleanor studied this woman who was, impossibly, her daughter's half-sister. 31 years old. A lifetime of wondering. A father who never knew she existed because his own father had paid to make her disappear. I do not know if it is real, Eleanor said honestly. I know he is trying. I know he has done things I never expected. But trust takes time. And he has a lot of time to make up for. Margaret nodded slowly. That is fair. What are you going to do? I do not know yet. That is why I wanted to talk to you first. To understand what I might be walking into. Eleanor considered her words carefully. If you come forward, she said, it will change everything. For Walter. For Josephine. For whatever Walter and I are trying to build. You understand that. I understand. And you are prepared for that. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I am prepared to know the truth, she finally said. Whatever it costs. Whatever it changes. I have spent 31 years in the dark. I think I am owed that much. Eleanor could not argue with that. Then come to dinner, she said. Friday night. At my house. Josephine will be there. Walter is supposed to come. You can meet them both and decide for yourself. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. You would do that. Invite a stranger into your home. Into your family. You are not a stranger, Eleanor said. You are my daughter's sister. Whether any of us knew it or not. She reached across the table and touched Margaret's hand. And I think you have been alone with this long enough. Margaret's eyes glistened. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me yet, Eleanor said. Friday is going to be complicated. She stood to leave. One more thing, she added. Walter does not know about any of this yet. I want to be the one to tell him. In my own way. In my own time. Margaret nodded. I understand. Eleanor left the coffee shop and walked to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a long time, not driving anywhere, simply trying to process what she had learned. Richard Crane had paid off at least one woman that they knew of. Probably more. Had calculated the cost of his son's indiscretions and written checks to make them disappear. Walter had learned his cruelty from somewhere. The question now was whether he had truly unlearned it, or whether the man who had threatened Eleanor in court was the real Walter Crane, and the man holding Josephine's hand in the hospital was just a temporary aberration. Friday would answer that question, one way or another. Eleanor told Walter that evening. She called him to the house after Josephine had gone to bed, sat him down at the kitchen table where she had received the first threatening letter from his attorneys, what felt like a lifetime ago. "There is something you need to know," she said. Walter's expression shifted to concern. "Is Josephine all right?" "Her hearing. Josephine is fine. This is not about her." "Not directly." Eleanor took a deep breath. "A woman contacted me yesterday. Her name is Margaret Holloway. She is 31 years old." Walter's brow furrowed in confusion. "I do not understand. Who is she?" "She is your daughter, Walter." The words hung in the air between them. Walter stared at her. "That is not possible. She has DNA evidence. Documents. A paper trail going back to 1991. Her mother was Catherine Holloway. She worked in your administrative offices." Something shifted in Walter's face. A flicker of recognition. "Catherine," he repeated slowly. "You remember her. We were together briefly. Before I met Caroline. Before any of it. I ended things when my father started pressuring me about suitable matches." He stopped. "She left the company suddenly. I assumed she had found another position." "She left because your father paid her $200,000 to disappear," Eleanor said. "She was 6 months pregnant with your child." Walter went very still. "My father. He visited her. Threatened her with legal action if she ever contacted you. Made her sign a non-disclosure agreement. She took the money and raised Margaret alone." Walter's hands were shaking. "I did not know," he said. "Eleanor, I swear to you, I did not know. I believe you. My father. He paid her off. He made her disappear." "The way you tried to make me disappear," Eleanor said quietly. The words landed like a slap. Walter closed his eyes. "Yes. The way I tried to make you disappear. I learned it from him. The reflex to pay problems away. To treat people as liabilities to be managed." He opened his eyes. "Where is she now?" "Margaret. She wants to meet you. She has been watching everything that happened with Josephine. She is trying to decide whether you are really different from the man your father raised you to be." Walter stood abruptly, walked to the window, stood with his back to Eleanor, looking out at the dark backyard. 31 years, he said. "I have a daughter who is 31 years old, who grew up without a father because my father decided she was inconvenient." "Yes." Walter was silent for a long time. "Does Josephine know?" he finally asked. "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." Walter turned to face her. "I want to meet her. Margaret. As soon as possible." "Friday," Eleanor said. "She is coming to dinner here. Josephine will be here too." Walter nodded slowly. "And if she hates me? If she has spent 31 years despising the man who abandoned her? Then you will have to earn her trust the way you are earning Josephine's," Eleanor said. Slowly, patiently, without expectation. Walter looked at her with something like wonder. "How are you so calm about this? Another woman. Another child. Evidence that my family has been buying off my mistakes for decades." Eleanor almost smiled. "Walter, after everything you put me through, very little surprises me anymore. And Margaret did not ask to be born any more than Josephine did. She deserves the same chance you are giving your other daughter." "My other daughter." He repeated the words as if testing how they felt. "I have 2 daughters." "You have 2 daughters," Eleanor confirmed. "And on Friday, they are both going to be sitting at my kitchen table. So I suggest you figure out what you want to say to them." Walter nodded slowly. "I will be here." He moved toward the door. Paused. "Eleanor, thank you. For telling me. For not letting me find out some other way." She studied his face. Looking for deception. Finding only the raw confusion of a man whose world had just shifted on its axis. "You have a lot of apologizing to do," she said. "To a lot of people. I hope you are ready for that. I am, Walter said. Whatever it takes. He left. Eleanor sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the silence of her modest house, and wondered if any of them were really ready for what Friday would bring. The days before Friday passed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor told Josephine about Margaret on Wednesday evening. She was as honest as she could be. Another daughter. Same father. Different mother. Different circumstances. Josephine listened in silence. When Eleanor finished, she was quiet for a long time. So I have a sister, she finally said. A half-sister. Yes. And she has known about Walter her whole life. She knew he existed. She did not know whether he knew about her. It turns out he did not. Josephine considered this. How old is she? 31. That is almost twice my age. I know. Josephine looked out the window. What is she like? I only met her once. She seemed smart. Careful. A little bit guarded, which I suppose is understandable. Is she angry at him? At Walter? Eleanor chose her words carefully. I think she is trying to figure out whether she should be. Josephine nodded slowly. That is fair. She turned back to her mother. I want to meet her. That is the plan. And Walter is coming too. Yes. Josephine's expression was unreadable. That is going to be interesting. That is one word for it. Josephine almost smiled. Mom. Thank you for telling me. For not just springing it on me Friday. I thought you deserved time to process. I appreciate that. She stood up from the table. I'm going to go practice piano. I need to think. Of course. Eleanor watched her daughter walk to the living room. Heard the piano bench creak as Josephine sat down. Then the first notes of Debussy filling the house. She could hear it now. Every note. Every nuance. Whatever else happened on Friday, that was a miracle Eleanor would never take for granted. Friday evening arrived with the particular tension of a gathering where no one knew exactly what to expect. Eleanor had spent the day cooking. Not because the food mattered, but because she needed something to do with her hands. Something to focus on besides the conversation that was about to happen. Josephine helped, mostly by staying out of the way and offering moral support from her perch on the kitchen counter. What if they hate each other? She asked. Who? Margaret and Walter. Or Margaret and me. Or all three of us. Then we will deal with it, Eleanor said. But I do not think that will happen. How do you know? I do not know. I just have a feeling. Great. A feeling. Eleanor smiled despite herself. Sometimes feelings are all we have. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Eleanor opened the door to find Margaret standing on the porch, holding a bottle of wine and looking more nervous than Eleanor had ever seen her. I was not sure what to bring, Margaret said. I hope red is acceptable. Red is perfect. Come in. Margaret stepped inside and stopped short when she saw Josephine standing in the hallway. For a long moment, the two half-sisters simply looked at each other. Josephine spoke first. You look like him. Margaret nodded slowly. So do you. Josephine tilted her head. Is that weird? For you? Everything about this is weird for me, Margaret admitted. Josephine almost smiled. Fair point. She extended her hand. I am Josephine. I guess you are my sister. Margaret took her hand. Half-sister. Technically. Josephine shrugged. Close enough. The tension in the room eased slightly. Come into the kitchen, Eleanor said. Walter should be here soon. They had barely settled around the kitchen table when the doorbell rang again. Eleanor answered it. Walter stood on her porch in a suit that probably cost more than her car, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking like a man walking to his own execution. Are you ready for this? Eleanor asked. No, Walter admitted. But I am here anyway. That is a start. She led him inside. Walter stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw Margaret. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Margaret stood slowly. Hello, Walter. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. Walter crossed the room until he was standing in front of her. Margaret, he said. I did not know. His voice cracked. I swear to you, I did not know. My father never told me. I never knew about the money. About any of it. Margaret studied his face. Looking for lies. Looking for the man she had imagined for 31 years. My mother believed you did not know, she said. She believed you would have done the right thing if you had. I would have. I would have wanted to. Wanted to, Margaret repeated. But would you have actually done it? Walter flinched. I do not know. The man I was back then. The man my father raised me to be. I am not sure what he would have done. He looked at her directly. But the man I am trying to become now would have. Does that count for anything? Margaret was silent for a long moment. I do not know yet, she finally said. Ask me again in a few months. Walter nodded. That is fair. He looked around the room. At Eleanor. At Josephine. At Margaret. I have made so many mistakes, he said. Hurt so many people. My father taught me that feelings were weaknesses to be eliminated. That relationships were transactions to be managed. That anything inconvenient could be paid off and forgotten. He straightened his shoulders. I do not want to be that man anymore. But I understand if none of you believe that yet. Words are cheap. Actions are what matter. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder. I had my attorneys draw up some papers this week. Eleanor tensed. What kind of papers? Walter opened the folder and laid 2 documents on the table. Trust documents, he said. One for Josephine. One for Margaret. $300 million each. The room went completely silent. Walter, Margaret said slowly. You cannot just buy my forgiveness with money. I know. This is not about forgiveness. This is about what is right. He looked at each of them in turn. You are both my daughters. You both deserve to share in what I have built. Not because I am trying to make up for the past with a checkbook, but because you are my children and this is your birthright. Margaret stared at the documents. $300 million. Yes. And you expect nothing in return. I expect nothing. I hope for the chance to know you. To be part of your life. But I understand that is not something I can demand or purchase. It has to be earned. Margaret looked at Eleanor. Is he serious? He appears to be, Eleanor said carefully. Josephine leaned forward. What about the IPO? She asked. If you give away $600 million, what happens to your company? Walter smiled slightly. It will survive. The company is valued at over $2 billion. This will reduce my personal stake, but the business is solid. It has survived for over 100 years. It will survive this. But people will ask questions, Josephine pressed. Your board. Your investors. They will want to know why you are suddenly giving away half your fortune to 2 daughters no one knew about. Walter nodded. Yes. They will ask. And I will tell them the truth. That I made mistakes. That my family made mistakes. And that I am trying to make them right. He looked at Margaret. If that embarrasses me publicly, so be it. If it costs me board positions and social invitations and the respect of people who only valued me for my money, then I will know exactly how much that respect was worth. Margaret sat down slowly. I did not come here for money, she said quietly. I know. I came here for answers. For the chance to understand why I spent 31 years without a father. And I cannot give you those years back, Walter said. I cannot undo what my father did. I cannot change the man I was. But I can choose who I become from here. And I am choosing to be the father you deserved all along. If you will let me. Margaret looked at the trust documents on the table. You really are risking everything, she said. $600 million. Your reputation. Your control over a company your family has run for generations. Some things are more important than control, Walter said. He looked at Eleanor. It took me far too long to learn that. But I am learning. The dinner that followed was awkward and strange and unexpectedly moving. For people who barely knew each other, bound together by biology and circumstance, trying to figure out how to be a family. Walter asked Margaret about her life. Her work. The childhood he had missed. She answered cautiously at first, then with growing openness as the evening wore on. She had graduated top of her class at Yale Law School, had built a successful career in estate litigation, had never married, though she had come close once. "He was too much like my father," she said. "Or who I imagined my father to be. Charming and ambitious and ultimately unavailable." She glanced at Walter. "I think I was drawn to that because it felt familiar. Even if the familiarity was based on a man I had never actually met." Walter absorbed this quietly. "I am sorry," he said, "for the ways my absence shaped your choices. Even choices you did not know I was influencing." Margaret nodded slowly. "I believe you are sorry. The question is what happens next." "Whatever you want to happen," Walter said. "I will follow your lead." "That is new," Margaret said. "The Walter Crane I read about in business magazines does not let other people take the lead." Walter smiled slightly. "The Walter Crane you read about has made a lot of mistakes. He is trying to learn from them." Josephine had been quiet through most of the conversation, watching the exchange between her father and her newly discovered half-sister with careful attention. Now she spoke. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You said you came here to decide whether Walter is different from the man his father raised him to be. Have you decided yet?" Margaret considered the question. "I think he wants to be different," she said finally. "I think he is trying. Whether that trying will last, I do not know. But the wanting seems real." She looked at Walter. "My mother always said you could tell a lot about a person by what they were willing to sacrifice. What they were willing to give up for something that could not be measured in dollars." She gestured at the trust documents, still sitting on the table. $600 million is a lot to give up. But it is still just money. What I want to know is whether you will be there for the things that money cannot buy. The ordinary moments. The difficult conversations. The long process of building trust. "I will be there," Walter said. "Prove it," Margaret replied. "Not today. Not with grand gestures. But over time. Consistently. Patiently." She stood from the table. "I should go. This has been a lot for one evening." Walter stood as well. "Can I see you again? Both of you?" He looked between Margaret and Josephine. "Maybe a dinner. Just the three of us. So we can get to know each other without the pressure of all this." He gestured vaguely at the trust documents, the formal setting, the weight of everything that had been discussed. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Dinner. Next week." She looked at Josephine. "I would like to get to know my sister. If she is willing." Josephine smiled. "I would like that too." Margaret left a few minutes later, after exchanging numbers with both Josephine and Eleanor. Walter stayed to help clean up, though his help mostly consisted of standing awkwardly in the kitchen while Eleanor washed dishes. "That went better than I expected," he said. "It went as well as it could have, given the circumstances. Do you think she will accept the trust?" "I do not know. She seemed more interested in your time than your money." "That is fair." Walter was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, thank you. For bringing us together. For giving me the chance to know her." "You have 2 daughters now," Eleanor said. "That is twice the responsibility. Twice the opportunity to disappoint them." "I know. Do you? Really?" Walter met her eyes. "I know I have a long way to go. I know words are cheap and actions are what matter. But I am going to keep showing up. Keep trying. Keep earning whatever trust you and they are willing to give me." Eleanor studied his face. "Good," she said finally. "Because if you hurt either of them, I will not give you another chance." "I understand. Make sure you do." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of relationship building. Walter had dinner with Josephine and Margaret every Thursday. He attended Josephine's piano recitals and Margaret's law firm events with equal dedication. He learned to listen more than he spoke. To ask questions instead of offering solutions. To be present without trying to control. It did not come naturally to him. He had spent his entire adult life in command of every situation. Relinquishing that control, even in family matters, required a conscious effort that left him exhausted and uncertain. But he kept trying. Margaret remained guarded. 31 years of absence could not be erased by a few dinners and a trust fund. But gradually, Almost imperceptibly, her defenses began to lower. She started calling him on Sunday mornings, just to talk. Started sharing stories about her childhood that she had never told anyone. Started asking his advice on difficult cases at work, though she rarely took it. She also started spending time with Josephine, independent of Walter. The two half-sisters discovered they had more in common than their father's genetics. A love of classical music. A dry sense of humor. A tendency to observe before speaking. They became, against all odds, friends. Eleanor watched all of this from a careful distance. She was not ready to forgive Walter completely. Was not sure she ever would be. But she could see that he was trying. That something fundamental had shifted in him. Whether it would last, only time would tell. The IPO went forward in May. Walter's public acknowledgement of his two daughters had caused exactly the scandal he had predicted. Board members questioned his judgment. Investors demanded explanations. Business publications ran stories about the billionaire who had abandoned multiple children and was now trying to buy redemption. The stock price dipped initially, then stabilized, then rose as the company's fundamentals proved stronger than the personal drama surrounding its chairman. Walter stepped back from day-to-day operations, as he had promised. He promoted qualified executives, delegated responsibility, started spending more time with his daughters and less time in boardrooms. His wife Caroline filed for divorce a week after the IPO. The marriage had been a business arrangement from the beginning, a merger of appropriate families that had produced two appropriate sons and little else. Walter did not contest the terms. He simply signed the papers and let her go. His sons from that marriage were more complicated. They had grown up with every advantage Walter's money could provide and had learned nothing about the value of anything that could not be purchased. When they learned about their half-sisters, they were furious. Not because they cared about family, but because they cared about inheritance. Walter met with them once, in his lawyer's office. Explained that he had set aside appropriate trusts for them as well. That his fortune was being divided equally among all four of his children, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. They threatened to contest the arrangement. To claim he was mentally incompetent. To drag the family name through courts for years. Walter listened patiently, then spoke. "You are welcome to try," he said. "But I want you to understand something. I am not doing this because I have lost my mind. I am doing this because I have finally found it. I spent decades treating people as assets to be managed. Including you. Including your mothers. Including everyone who had the misfortune of depending on me." He looked at his sons with something like sadness. "You are the products of that approach to life. Entitled. Calculating. Unable to see value in anything that cannot be converted to dollars. And that is my fault. I raised you to be exactly like me." He stood. "I hope someday you will understand what I am trying to do. That you will see there are more important things than money and control. But I am not going to wait for that understanding. I am going to do what is right regardless of whether you approve." His sons left without speaking to him again. Walter accepted their silence as the price of his choices. Summer arrived with long days and warm evenings. Eleanor and Walter had fallen into a pattern that neither of them had anticipated. Dinners together at her house. Long conversations on her porch while Josephine practiced piano inside. A tentative rebuilding of something that had been broken 16 years ago. They did not call it dating. Did not put a label on whatever was growing between them. But they both knew that something had shifted. One evening in late June, they sat on her porch watching fireflies drift across the backyard. "I have been thinking," Walter said. "That sounds dangerous," Eleanor replied. He smiled slightly. "About us. About what happens next." Eleanor was quiet. Waiting. "I know I hurt you," Walter continued. "Years ago. And more recently. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. May never deserve it." He turned to face her. "But I want you to know that I am not going anywhere. Whatever you decide about us, whatever form this relationship takes, I am committed to being part of your life. Part of Josephine's life. Part of Margaret's life." He paused. "I am not the man I was, Eleanor. I am not even the man I was 6 months ago. And I plan to keep changing. Keep growing. Keep earning the trust of the people who matter to me. Eleanor studied his face in the fading light. You know, I cannot just forget what you did, she said. The lawsuit. The threats. The way you tried to make me disappear. I know. And I cannot promise that I will ever fully trust you again. I know that too. So what are you asking for? Walter considered the question. A chance, he said finally. Not to make up for the past. That is not possible. But to build something new. Something that did not exist before. Something based on who we are now, not who we were then. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. The fireflies drifted. Inside, Josephine played Claire de Lune. I will think about it, Eleanor finally said. That is all I ask. They sat in comfortable silence until the stars came out. The final test came in September. Walter received word that his father's estate was being audited. Old files had been discovered. Files that documented at least 3 other payments made to women over the years. Women who had borne children that Richard Crane had paid to disappear. 3 more potential children. 3 more siblings that Josephine and Margaret might have. Walter brought the information to Eleanor first. I do not know if any of these resulted in actual births, he said. The files only document payments. But it is possible that I have other children out there. Other family members who were erased by my father's checkbook. Eleanor looked at the documents he had brought. What are you going to do? Walter took a deep breath. I am going to investigate. Find out if there are others. And if there are, I am going to do for them what I did for Margaret. Acknowledge them. Provide for them. Give them the chance to know their father. Even if it costs you more money. Money is not the issue, Walter said. The issue is doing what is right. Even if it complicates your life further. My life is already complicated. A few more complications will not matter. Eleanor studied him. You really have changed, she said quietly. I told you I would. I am just sorry it took losing everything that mattered before I figured out what mattered. He reached across the table and took her hand. Whatever I find out, I want you to know. I am not going to run from this. Not going to hide from the consequences of my family's choices. I am going to face it. All of it. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I believe you, she said. And for the first time, she meant it. The investigation took 3 months. In the end, Walter found 2 more children. A son in California, now 28, who had grown up believing his father had died before he was born. A daughter in London, now 35, who had known about Walter but had never tried to contact him, convinced he would reject her the way her mother had warned. Walter flew to meet each of them personally, told them the truth about what his father had done, offered them the same trust arrangements he had offered Margaret. The son, whose name was Thomas, was cautiously receptive. He had always wondered about his father, had always felt something was missing from the story his mother told. Learning that his father was a billionaire who had been kept in the dark about his existence was strange, but not unwelcome. The daughter, whose name was Vivian, was angrier. She had spent 35 years believing Walter had knowingly abandoned her. Learning that his father had orchestrated everything did not immediately erase that anger. But she agreed to meet with him again, to consider the possibility that the man standing before her was not the monster she had imagined. By Christmas, Walter had 4 acknowledged children. 4 trusts totaling $1.2 billion. 4 complicated relationships that would take years to fully develop. And 1 woman who had finally, tentatively, agreed to give him a second chance. Eleanor had watched everything. The search for his other children. The meetings. The trust arrangements. The patient, persistent effort to become the father he should have been all along. And she had finally come to a conclusion. You are not the man I fell in love with 18 years ago, she told him on Christmas Eve. That man was charming and ambitious and ultimately empty. Walter nodded slowly. I know. You are also not the man who threatened me in court. That man was cruel and frightened and hiding behind lawyers and money. I know that too. So who are you now? Walter considered the question. I am a man who wasted most of his life chasing things that did not matter. Who hurt people because he was too afraid to love them. Who almost lost everything before he figured out what he actually wanted. He looked at her directly. I am a man who wants to spend whatever time he has left building something real. Something that matters. Something that will last longer than any business or fortune. He paused. I am a man who loves you, Eleanor. Who has always loved you, even when I was too broken to show it. And who will spend the rest of his life proving that love, if you will let me. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. Ask me again next Christmas, she said. If you are still here. Still trying. Still showing up. Walter smiled back. I will be here. I know, Eleanor said. That is why I am saying yes. She leaned forward and kissed him gently. Merry Christmas, Walter. Merry Christmas, Eleanor. In the living room, Josephine was playing piano. Margaret sat beside her, turning pages. Thomas had flown in from California and was watching with the quiet wonder of someone discovering a family he never knew he had. Vivian had declined to come this year, but had sent a card. Progress was slow, but it was progress. The house was full of music and light and the particular warmth of people who had found each other against all odds. Walter Crane had spent his life building an empire. Now he was building a family. And for the first time, he understood that the family was worth more than all the empires in the world. 1 year later, the piano recital was held in the Westbrook Concert Hall, a venue that usually hosted professional symphonies and touring virtuosos. Tonight, it hosted Josephine Whitmore's debut performance. She had been offered a full scholarship to Juilliard, which she had accepted. This recital was her farewell to Millbrook, a thank you to the community that had supported her through her illness and recovery. The hall was packed. Friends and teachers. Local supporters. Music critics who had heard about the remarkable teenager who had nearly lost her hearing and fought her way back. And in the front row, her family. Eleanor sat in the center, her eyes already glistening with tears she had not yet shed. Beside her, Walter held her hand with the quiet confidence of a man who had finally learned what mattered. Margaret sat on Walter's other side, her initial guardedness now softened into something like affection. Thomas had flown in from California. Even Vivian had come from London, her anger not fully resolved but her curiosity stronger than her resentment. 4 children. 1 woman. A family assembled from the wreckage of decades of mistakes. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. Josephine walked onto the stage in a simple black dress. She sat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench, placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she looked out at the audience, found her mother's face, her father's, her sisters and brothers. Then she began to play. Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the concert hall. The same piece she had practiced when she could not hear it. The same piece that had drawn Walter to her window on a winter night and started him on the path to redemption. Now she played it with the full richness of restored hearing. Every note precise. Every phrase shaped with the emotion of someone who understood what it meant to almost lose music forever. In the audience, Eleanor wept openly. Walter sat very still, tears running down his face, making no effort to hide them. Margaret reached over and took his hand. Thomas stared at the stage with wonder. Even Vivian brushed at her eyes. When the piece ended, the silence held for one perfect moment. Then the hall erupted in applause. Josephine stood and bowed. Looked again at her family in the front row. Smiled. She had nearly lost everything. Her hearing. Her future. Her chance to know her father. But she had gained something more valuable. A family that had been broken and was slowly, painfully, beautifully being healed. The applause continued for a long time. In the front row, Walter Crane sat surrounded by the children he had almost never known. The woman he had almost driven away. The life he had almost destroyed. He had risked $600 million to bring them together. It was the best investment he had ever made. And as Josephine began her next piece, as the music filled the hall with joy and hope and the promise of all the years to come, Walter understood finally what true wealth really meant. It was not measured in dollars or stock prices or the respect of people who only valued you for what you could give them. It was measured in moments like this. In second chances that should not have been possible. In the faces of the people you loved, gathered together, present and real and yours. Walter closed his eyes and listened to his daughter play. And for the first time in his life, he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. This story began with a mother begging for help and a billionaire who responded with cruelty. It ends with a family assembled from the fragments of decades of mistakes. Walter Crane learned that some things cannot be bought, negotiated, or controlled. That the love of a child must be earned. That the trust of a woman you wronged is a gift you do not deserve but must work every day to honor. He learned that his father's way of solving problems, with money and silence and erasure, was not strength but cowardice. That real strength was showing up when it was hard. Admitting when you were wrong. Trying again after you failed. He learned that $600 million was nothing compared to a daughter's smile. That a seat in the front row of a piano recital was worth more than a seat on any corporate board. That building a family was harder than building an empire, but infinitely more rewarding. Eleanor learned that forgiveness was not a single moment but a process. That people could change if they wanted to badly enough. That giving someone a second chance did not erase the past but could create a better future. Josephine learned that fathers were not defined by biology but by presence. That having a sister, even one she had never known existed, could enrich her life in ways she had never imagined. That music was a gift worth fighting for. And Margaret learned that the story she had told herself for 31 years was not the whole truth. That the man she had imagined as a villain was more complicated than any story could contain. That family was not something you were born into but something you chose, day after day, person after person. If there is a lesson in this story, it is this. We all make mistakes. We all hurt the people we love. We all fail to be the people we should be. But it is never too late to start over. Never too late to say you are sorry. Never too late to show up, even when showing up is the hardest thing you have ever done. The measure of a person is not their worst moment but their willingness to learn from it. Their determination to do better. Their commitment to the slow, painful, beautiful work of becoming who they were always meant to be. Walter Crane was a billionaire who almost lost everything that mattered. Then he risked everything he had to get it back. And in the end, he discovered that the things money cannot buy are the only things worth having. Thank you for joining me for this story of heartbreak and redemption. If it touched your heart, please subscribe and share with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. Until next time, remember that second chances are possible if we have the courage to offer them and the humility to accept them. This has been Tales of Desire with Mr. Walker. Take care of yourselves and each other.